right, and
hi, Nick. It's fine, right?
it's not, but I will not worry about it. We'll figure it out. We'll do it all landscape today, or all portrait.
Good.
It is, except everybody's television that when they watch it is not that way, because with the YouTube and with those things, people can watch it on their television. So this is one I'm just going to have to go in and edit and cut and repost. And
It's all right. Technology.
technology, you're right, because normally it figures it all out, and now it is figuring it out the wrong way. So we just. All right, so we were talking before. Josie and I were talking about kind of what you almost need a recap. And I've been watching some of those old, like I was telling her, some of those old like Stephen Cannell television shows from the 80s. You know, da 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 da, right where the cat or the paper. But it's like Wise Guy and Simon and Riptide and all these kind of old television serials where they would start out in the very beginning. They're like, last time, and they'd show like clips through the season. You're like, oh yeah, that's right, that guy. I remember that guy. And then they'd start the story. We almost need to do something like that when we get into these long narrative pieces, because the reality is we're going to see people that were like, oh, we saw this guy like in episode 3. So it would be great to have kind of those sorts of cheat sheets. And we stole that from we got that from the cinema with David. So it's neat to be able to refer to pictures and say, remember Saul, remember Samuel, and have those kind of things. So I think at some point I'll maybe print a little card, like a little character list. Yes?
It occurred to me that if you did one even before each message, we could email it to people so they have it on their phones, they could pull it up.
We could, absolutely. All of those things are things we could do. Or we could put it on the thing, and then when we get the video all right, no, I don't know. It's funny, there's all these things that I'm like, man, we really could do that? Yeah, I would just add 20 minutes here. So if I could just find which 20 minutes I stop doing things that I'm already doing and just do this other thing. But it's a good idea, I really want to get to it.
If you had to do one thing and I could do this.
That's the idea, that's the plan, it's a good one. But even this thing isn't playing with me today. Right Now Media, let me do this really quick commercial while we're talking about it. If you guys can also coming in, they're visiting, you can scan this, or I think there's a piece of paper out there that has the Right Now Media code. For free, you have access to 20,000 studies or whatever, all of this stuff. So the church pays, and then we're allowed to share this out because it's a good thing to do devotionals, they can be played as audio files on your phone if you're driving for like a podcast. They can be done that. So there's Bible studies. It's based on ages. It's based on, you can go do that. And there's some worship stuff on there. There's all kinds of cool stuff. So again, Right Now Media, that's out there. It's good free resource just to have a look at it. All right. Where we are at, we're in 2 Samuel. So yes, back to David, young David, when everything was great and wonderful early on in his life. We're not there anymore. We're now with old David. So we are in 2 Samuel. We're about 15-ish chapters in. And what we're seeing here is Absalom. Absalom's David's third son. And he is leading a civil war, is what has happened at this point in the story. And one of those questions, how did we get here? Well, it is a series of disappointments because that young David who had faith in God and who was God's instrument to do things, he started out doing all those things, and then pretty soon, as he was reigning in Jerusalem, he started surrounding himself with Saul's advisors, and he surrounded himself with Saul's people, and he started acting more and more like Saul. So you start seeing at the point where you get before Bathsheba, when he was supposed to be out at war, when kings are supposed to be out at war, David was not. So instead of being out on mission, doing the things that he had been called to do as God, instead of being that boy, instead, he was being like Saul, sitting in one place. And what he ended up doing is he ended up thwarting his own purpose. And in that, we see the sin of Bathsheba, right? And that was, the result of that sin is actually multifold. After that, the result of that sin, we have this horrible incident where, kinds of, as a consequence of that, we have even, and we talked about it, incest within that family. His oldest son rapes his daughter. Awful. All of these things happen. And then Absalom, the brother of the sister that was raped, all ugly, ends up murdering his oldest brother. And in all of this, David does nothing. He doesn't protect his daughter that was violated. He doesn't punish the son that did that. And after 7 years, the other son, Absalom, murdered or killed the rapist. All of these ugly things. And still David does nothing. So the man who was supposed to be God's agent of justice and mercy, the one who was supposed to protect the innocent, not protecting anybody. And there's already been a little bit of a reason for it. I'd mentioned that some of the texts have inserted in the verses just so that scribes wanted to make sure that we didn't miss it. The idea that the reason David didn't punish Absalom is because he loved him so much. It's like, my baby, I can't discipline him. And because of that leads to that spoiledness, and Absalom, that leads to rebellion. So in David, because and I would say David thinks he loves his son so much, but by withholding discipline, it's not a loving thing. What's the scripture teach? God disciplines those he loves. That discipline and creating that structure is a form, is a way of love and bringing forth that. And because of that, and this is the great irony of the names, Absalom, his meaning like Abba, Salom, or Shalom. Absalom, that's his name. He's supposed to be the father of peace. But Absalom, instead of being the father of peace, he brings war. So there's this disappointment that's happened, and that's kind of what we're seeing in this part of the story. So if we open up to chapter 15, where we were at last week. Toby, I'm going to need your head up here so I can. There we go. Because I'm just going to do this. I don't know. 9 o'clock, new batteries, everything's working. 10 and 11 o'clock, not so much. After this, Absalom brought a chariot of horses. Okay, so what had happened? So he murdered his brother. He flees. He's gone for a little while. And then David finally brings him back. But he brings him back to Jerusalem. He doesn't let him into the palace, but he's in the home in Jerusalem, in the capital. And then he's there for a few years, and he doesn't come in, and then he gets upset. And Absalom had burned down Joab's farm or ranch, or not his ranches, his crops, just to get his attention. Then he comes in, and they hugged it out at the end of the last chapter. After this, Absalom bought a chariot and horses. By the way, chariots are a war thing. This is like he bought himself a tank. And then he hired himself a special forces troop. That's what we see right here. If somebody moved into Washington, D.C. and hired himself a Secret Service and a troop and a tank and started driving around the Capitol, what would we say to that guy? We'd be like, hey, something's not right here. And that's supposed to be happening, right? He got up early every morning and he went out to the gate of the city. This is like the capital. The gate of the city is where the king or the judge would sit to hear the problems. So he goes to the courthouse, and what's he do with his tank? He sits right in the middle of the courthouse. And when people brought a case to the king for judgment, Absalom would ask the Israelites where they're from. He's like, where are you from? Oh, I've been there. He did crowd work, right? He's like a comedian. And then they tell each other, you're from the tribe. And then Absalom would do this. Then Absalom would say, you really got a strong case here. It's too bad the king doesn't hear it. That's kind of slimy, isn't it? He says, I wish I were the judge, and then everyone could bring their cases to me for judgment, and I would give them justice. When people tried to bow before him, Absalom said, get up, right? He wouldn't let him do that. Instead, he took him by the hand and he kissed him, and Absalom saying, everyone who came to the king for judgment, this is what he did to everybody. He's intercepting everybody. So he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. So David wasn't out at war when he was supposed to be at war. David wasn't doing justice when he was supposed to do justice. And these are the reasons the kings have the swords. They have the swords to bring terror to evildoers. That's what the Bible says. They're there to protect the innocent. That's what they're there for. He's not doing any of that. It's a problem. And now, this is very slimy of Absalom, absolutely. This is treasonous of Absalom. This is all of that. But it's the next couple words. After 4 years. For 4 years, not Absalom's problem. Whose problem is it? Again, David isn't doing the mission that David was called to do. So he lets this treason happen for 4 years long. So when we see Absalom's rebellion, when we see the civil war that's happening, sure, absolutely, Absalom's sin is part of the problem. Totally. Absalom's sin is part of the problem. But so is David's sin. David's sin of failing to do what he's supposed to do through all of this increases the pain and suffering. The Bible does it this way when it tells stories about like David. So we see all these things about David because the way that it tells the story of David, we see David doing some good things and some bad things. We see David suffering from the consequences of his sin and sometimes from the consequences of others people's sin. And when we see that, and then we superimpose our life on it, do we fall into the same kind of situations, right? Some of the problems that I have in my life are there because of my sin. Some of them are from the sins of those around me. And there's a sense where some of those things in my life, sometimes I've done the right things, and sometimes I haven't done the wholly right thing. I've done the right things, sometimes I've done mixed motive things, and sometimes I've done things that were totally wrong. And all of that has been my story. So as God is working in David's life, then we can assume, can God work in our life in a similar way? So that's the sense of it. That's why the Bible tells us David's story like this. The writer of 2 Samuel did not put every victory to defeat. It puts enough in the idea of all of these things about David so that we can superimpose our life on it and go, hey, the God that does this to David can also do this for us. That's the thing that we're supposed to see of it. So here we go. Absalom, right? 4 years, he said to the king, let me go to Hebron to the sacrifice I made to him. For while your servant was in Geshur in Amram, I promised to sacrifice the Lord in Hebron if he would bring me back to Jerusalem. Lots of. Now, what is happening is he is essentially comparing his life to somebody else's life. He's comparing it to, do you remember a cat named Jacob? When Jacob was being hunted by his brother Esau, and he sees the ladder and the angels and all this, he makes that promise to God. He's like, hey, listen, God, if when I go out into the wilderness, if you keep me safe and come back, you'll be my God. So, Absalom is using churchy words. I'll say that. I'm going to say church a lot when we talk about this, and I know that somebody could say, well, the church is New Testament. That's the word we use in the New Testament, sure. But I'm going to use it anachronistically here, talking about the faithful people in the Old Testament. Absalom's essentially borrowing from a story in Genesis to justify his going to Hebron. Now, to the audience that hears this story from 2 Samuel, we know that he's fibbing. Part of the reason we know it is because several times the author, just in case we didn't notice, stepped aside and said, hey, it's so that he could manipulate the people. So we know Absalom's motivation. David maybe didn't. Now another hint is that he said he was going to offer this sacrifice when he returned to the land. That sounds great. How long has he been in Jerusalem by this time? 7 years. 7 years! Yeah. A little late. If you said, God, I'm going to give you $20, this is if the light turns green, right? Then the time to give God, nobody's going to do that. But sometimes we make that little insight bet. What if I make that prayer? If the light turns green, then I'll go ahead and visit my sister or whatever the deal is. But if you make that little deal with God and then you don't fulfill it for 7 years, they're not. It's manipulative. The other manipulative thing, Hebron. Why is Hebron an important city? It used to be the capital before David moved the capital to Jerusalem. Good for Ricky. Ricky remembers from all of 2 hours ago. He's a plant. Yes! Hebron was the traditional capital. It's the city of Abraham. So he's going, it's like he's setting up... I don't know, if you're a history geek like me, it would be like Thomas Jefferson loses the election to John Adams, which happened, right? And then if Thomas Jefferson says, hey, you know what? My bad. I'm just going to go to Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And everybody's like, hey, that's where they wrote the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Yes. He's like, I'm just going to hang out there with my guard and my tank and everything. So everybody is looking at the narrative going, we know what's happening here. He's going to the old capital to set up. All right, the king told him, go fulfill your vow. So Absalom went to Hebron, but while he was there, they sent a secret message to all the tribes of Israel to stir up rebellion against the king. As soon as you hear the ram's horn, this is the message you read. You would say, Absalom has been crowned king on Hebron. So here you go. This is one of those things. This is a secret that's not so secret. Right? This is the conspiracy everybody should recognize. Because for 4 years, he's been doing it not in secret, but at the gate in Jerusalem. So he's sending out these messages, these conspiratorial messages, and so much so that finally one of those messages gets back to David. He also took 200 men from Jerusalem with him as a guest. Now, these 200 men don't know nothing, his intentions, but a whole lot of other people do. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, one of David's counselors who lived in Gilon, and soon many other conspirators joined Absalom, and the conspiracy began to take momentum. All right, here's the first name I want to change. Ahithophel. That's a fun name, isn't it? Ahithophel. How many are going to remember that name after we leave here? Probably not. But you have a similar character in your own history. In Jewish tradition, Ahithophel, the name Ahithophel, becomes synonymous with the word traitor because of this. So when Jews hear this story, when they see the word Ahithophel, they think traitor. Do we have a name that when we see the name, we think traitor? Benedict Arnold. So if instead of Ahithophel, I said Benedict Arnold, you'd have the same, there he is. That Benedict Arnold. So, maybe I should just say Ahithophel Arnold. One of David's counselors who lived right, that's who he is. Now here's the other part of the dagger. Ahithophel is one of David's closest advisors. He's a wise man. He's a sage. He's also the grandpa of Bathsheba, David's new wife. So not only is this one of his close advisors and the sage and the kind of like the big counselor that he had, the part of his if you like his cabinet goes over there. It's also his new in-laws. What a betrayal. So it's his son that's betrayed him. It's his closest counselor that's betrayed him. So So the message soon comes to Jerusalem to tell David, hey, all Israel has joined Absalom in this conspiracy against you. Now, let's talk about feelings, right? Feelings we experience. David experiences feelings. We experience feelings. And feelings will tell us all kinds of things, or maybe I should say suggest to us all kinds of things. But here's the question. Can your feelings tell you things that are not quite true?
Yes.
So just because we feel it, it doesn't mean it's true. It does mean we feel it. But those are two different. So does David feel abandoned right now? Absolutely. Has he been abandoned? No. So even though he feels totally alone, we're going to see that what God reveals is that he's not alone. That God is provisioning and taking care of it. So here in David's shame, in his sadness, in his reaction to, by the way, should David have shame right now? Yeah. He should feel shame. What should he feel shame for? Oh, adultery with Bathsheba, murdering of Uriah, not functioning as the king protecting the nation, not functioning as the king protecting the innocent, being more worried about his comfort in what he sees good with his eyes than his mission that God gave him. All of those things, absolutely. Those things he could feel shame for. What might he feel shame for right now is the son that he loves isn't with him right now. Might feel inadequate. And what we see is he says, then we must flee at once. And by the way, this is that same theme that we see a lot here is the theme of advisement. So this messenger who's coming in and telling him stuff, we don't know the virtue of what he says. He doesn't know anything. But we see David reacting and responsive to all of these things. It reminds us again, David's the one who writes Psalm 1, who reminds us the dangers of sitting at the table and listening to the wicked, right? In Psalm 1. That you need to be looking for righteous advisors. Because for a second, we see David's been in this for several chapters. David's getting all kinds of voices around him, but we don't hear so many Nathans. We don't hear many priests. We don't see that sort of stuff around him. And that's part of the issue. He's been surrounding himself with the wrong stuff. So then David thinks what he sees. Then we must flee at once or it will be too late. David urged him, hurry. We must get out of the city before Absalom arrives. Both we and the city of Jerusalem will be then spared this disaster. And his advisors, they surround him. And again, what advice do they give him? Seek the Lord's guidance. Do you hear that? You hear, I heard a message from the Lord. None of that. What do you hear? Do whatever you think's right. Now that sounds great in 21st century third grade, right? When your little teacher is just going and patting you, oh, Billy, do whatever you think is right. That sounds good in the world. Does that sound good in the Bible? No, that's one of those phrases that we get nervous about. Because repeatedly we see people doing what we think is right, and it comes back, it echoes the promise in the garden. The one promise that we desperately want to believe from the Bible. And maybe I should say it's not from the Bible so much as it's in the Bible. The first promise we get is, if we eat the fruit, we will be gods, able to declare what is right and wrong. And we believe that because in the garden they ate the fruit, we still believe that Trump promise. Do you guys remember from the story of the Garden of Eden? Who made the promise? The serpent made the promise. So that one promise that we all want to believe, that we can determine and declare things that are right and wrong, doesn't come from God. So this idea, David, you're like a God, you can figure it out, is not the advice he needs to have. He needed somebody to say, David, seek the Lord's guidance. Because remember when he was young David, and Saul was hiding in the tent, and Goliath was out daring everybody to stand up against, David says, it doesn't matter. It's God who saves. My strength isn't found in this. David looks like he's doing this great thing. There's a sense of him abandoning the city. You're like, oh, so great. He doesn't want collateral damage. No. I like the idea. Gosh, I wish it was that. I wish it's as easy as saying, he doesn't want the name, the city named, and you see, Shalom, Jerusalem, city of peace. So he doesn't want his civil war to bring destruction into the city of peace, and that sounds great. But let's just talk war for a second. Jerusalem had withheld everybody from Joshua to David. The city of Jerusalem was strong enough to stand against the might of Israel for nearly 500 years. David doesn't have to abandon Jerusalem. Had he just stayed in Jerusalem, Absalom would have not been able to overcome him in Jerusalem. But he leaves. Why does he leave? Because he feels shame. Some of the shame comes from the right motivations, so from his sin. Some of the shame comes from embarrassment. Some of the shame comes from this. But there's a sense that the David that's leaving here is not the David that was, hey, if God's on my side, it doesn't matter. But it's him he's been affected by sin. And he's dragging as he goes out there. And now here's the thing. So, yes, as much as I would love Nathaniel or some prophet to just come in here and slap David upside the head, which would be great. God uses even his suffering and all this to reveal something to us that's going to be really great. So stand on this story. This is really a great story. Because David feels all alone. Another story in the Bible is very similar to this. Do you remember the guy Elijah? Yes. Elijah sitting in the fourth row. Not that Elijah. We all remember Elijah. Plays the violin. Very talented. Beat Ricky in his running yesterday by like 3 minutes. I don't know how much, probably a lot. But what's that?
2 minutes at least.
2 minutes at least. But the Elijah in the Bible, when he does the great, I like to think of it as like a God off, where you have like 400 prophets of Baal, and they're like, trying to get their sacrifice to catch fire, and Elijah does his sacrifice, and the fire comes down from heaven, consumes it, and then all the people murder the Baal prophets, and it looks like a victory. But what does Elijah do after that moment? You guys remember that in the story? He runs into the desert, and he's sad. Like, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, big old gooey worms, right? That's what he does. He goes out in the wilderness, out in the place where there's nobody, and while he's running and fleeing and sitting in shame, because that's what he does. He feels like he's a failure, because the prophet of the Lord is to seek to turn the hearts of the people to God. And if he thinks all of Israel has abandoned God, who has failed? Elijah feels he's failed. So he runs off into the wilderness. You know, in the story, when he goes off in the wilderness, does he die in the wilderness? No, God sends angels to provide for him and protect him. Elijah's story happens hundreds of years after David's. So again, this is one of those things where we see David's story and his depression here, and how much it mirrors Elijah's story hundreds of years later and his depression. And God still gets involved. And that's one of the great things. Again, the main character of every story in the Bible is the same main character in your own life story, and that is God. So that's how come we can stretch 400 or 500 years and see similar working, because the same God is working in all these stories hundreds of years apart, and it's the same God that's working in our own lives. And that's what we see as we go forward. So, the king and all his household all set out at once, and they left no one behind except the 10 of his concubines who took to look after the palace. And then the king and all his people set out on foot, pausing at the last house to let the king's men move past as they got on the way. So we get the sense. So David feels like he's all alone. And then we have a parade.
Yeah.
of all the people that are with him. Same thing happened to Elijah. Elijah, not this one, again. The earlier Elijah, he sat alone in the wilderness. He's like, I'm alone and nobody loves me. And God says, he lets him do it for a second to just get through the shame and all the stuff he's dealing with. And then he says, okay, get up. He goes, no. 400 prophets haven't bowed their knee to Baal. There are other people around you that you're, in the sense that your guilt and all this is covering your ability to understand. So that's the sense that's happening here. And as we're looking at the story. Again, we're looking at the story and we're seeing God's hand. And we see not just David suffering from David's sin. We're seeing the group coming around. And I told you I use the word church anachronistically. There you go. Anachronistically out of time. But it's not really. In this story, that's kind of what is revealed. Through this suffering, the people that are suffering with David are the people that are spiritually connected to David. Very much like we, as a body of believers, bear one another's burdens. We lift one another up. So when one of us suffers, we all suffer with it. When one of us celebrates, we all celebrate with them. In the body of the church, we have brothers and sisters and moms and dads, and we have a connectedness. And it's a connectedness that has transcended culture and class and race, and it has always been that way. That's always been the message. And it's really amazing, too, because let's finish. We're not going to finish. We're going to keep reading because this is just amazing. So the king and all his household set out at once, and nobody was, we all talked about the concubines. I really wanted to get this verse in there. From the New Testament. Because there's another New Testament similarity. I'll do it. Okay. Remnants, or the idea of these 10 people awaiting the return of David, very similar to the 10 bridesmaids that wait with their oil as Jesus leaves and waiting for Jesus' return. There's a pictureness to that. Then the king turned to did I skip the last one?
Yes, you didn't read the last sentence.
The last sentence. Buy another one of these. Okay. The king, all his people set out afoot past house. Oh yeah. There were 600 men from Gath who were with David, along with the bodyguard. So there's this picture of the king's men and his bodyguard and 600 people and all the house. Now 600 men from Gath. You guys remember? Oh, thank you. This is last half of the video. I'll be good. Do you remember where Gath is? Who are the people from Gath? Goliath's people. Those are the Philistines. Those are the bad guys. Those are the evil Gentiles. But these guys aren't evil anymore, are they? So back to the battle that happened when he defeated Goliath's God. Well, God defeated Dagon. It shows that. And that's the thing that we're seeing here. So then, the king, so David turned to Ittai, I don't know, the guy's not here, a leader of the men from Gath, and he said, why are you coming with us? Go back to the king of Absalom, or back to King Absalom, for you're a guest of it in Israel, a foreigner in exile. You only arrived recently, and why should I force you to wander with me? I don't even know where we're going to go. Go back to your home and take your kinsmen with you, and may the Lord show kindness and unfailing love and faithfulness. David gives them a blessing and sends them on the way. This is kind of like, just because I saw the video again, I just love Henry V. Like in the Christmas Day speech, he's like, hey, listen, If nobody wants to fight and die with us here, that's okay. You can go home. I'll give you your passport. You can head back home with no harm or foul, but only those that are faithful. There's a sense of that kind of dismissing. And I just love this. But it's so again, Goliath's kin from Gath, the Philistine, said to the king, I vow to the Lord I bow by the Lord. Does it say to your Lord?
It's Yahweh.
What's that?
That's Yahweh.
That's Yahweh. He says, I vow by Yahweh. Now, sometimes we see non-believers talking, we say the Lord your God is what we've seen. Oftentimes people have put that in there. So this is showing the guy calls Yahweh his Lord. And by your life that I will go wherever my Lord the King goes, no matter what happens, whatever it means, life or death. David replied, all right, and come with me. So I said, not only does he come, his house, as for me and my house, we'll serve you, we'll go with you. This is such a beautiful moment. Again, so many things in the Bible just resonate, show God's handiwork and the beauty, and it's like, if it was a television show, there's like theme music that you hear the same music. The same music that you hear happens in the New Testament too. There's a point where Jesus' teaching starts getting heavy and people start abandoning Jesus. And Jesus turns to his disciples. He's like, hey, you guys going to go too? So Jesus turned to the 12 and he said, are you going to leave? And Simon Peter turns around and said, Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. We believe and we know that you're the Holy One of God. That music that's playing underneath that, where we're like, wipe a tear, go Simon, you're doing great, go Peter, right? That same feeling that we have there is the same one that we have from this evil Philistine who's been redeemed by God. Who's now progressing out with David as he comes out of the city. Everyone cried loudly as the king and his followers passed by. Again, David felt like he's alone. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like everybody's mourning. He crossed into Kidron Valley, and then they went out toward the wilderness. And Zadok and all the Levites also came along with the Ark of the Covenant. And they sat down with the Ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices to everybody who had passed through through the city. Abiathar. Who's Abiathar? Do you remember when Saul, big guy over there, gets mad at David, and because the tabernacle sheltered David, Saul goes in and murders all the priests. The one priest that survived and fled to David was Abiathar. So he's representative of the priesthood of Aaron, the surviving element of the priesthood of Aaron that's staying loyal to God. As a matter of fact, what we see here is kind of a picture again of the people. Whereas the people coming out of the wilderness, all the people were the 12 tribes that were surrounding the tabernacle as they were traveling, and that's how you recognize the church, if you will, in the Exodus. It's very interesting. You see a group of people surrounding the Ark of God coming out again into the wilderness. We see a similar thing, but here's an interesting thing. Is this group of the 12 tribes? It's not. Like some of the people that are closest related to David are on the other side of the war. So the people that are his brothers and sisters, some of them are family members, but some of them aren't. A lot of them have been people that have been David's enemies before. But God has woven them together. So now this group that's surrounded, in other words, the picture of the ark, when we see the ark, it's symbolic of God traveling with us. It sounds like what we see here is a picture of what the church will look like. It's Jews and Gentiles. And I know, I just love going into that. I just love just screaming this because it's so beautiful. The reason that they name these two priests, so Abiathar and Zodak, they beat them a lot here in David. Zodak and David, we don't know well. At this point, if we were the first audience, we'd go, okay, why do we keep saying Zadok, or whatever? keep saying this guy's name and Abiathar? Why do you keep talking about these guys? Well, in 500-ish years, Ezekiel is going to write about it. He's going to give us a clue. The Bible sometimes does things literally that are also symbolic. Is also in the descendant line of Aaron. So he is technically part of the priesthood of Aaron, but his name, Zadok, is another name that if we were a little more familiar with Hebrew, it means righteous. It means the priest the righteous priest. And we say it a lot because the high king priest, king means Melech, or Melech-Zodak, or Melchizedek, is the righteous king. It's the same name. Now, Ezekiel, when he talks about the millennial reign of Christ in the end and everything, he's talking about the priesthood. He talks about the priesthood of Zadok, of this guy. And what he does is he kind of links the priesthood of Zadok to a restored priesthood that's actually a recovered priesthood like Melchizedek priesthood. So what Ezekiel does and what the writer of Hebrew does with the Melchizedek priesthood being his priesthood that's superior to Aaron's priesthood, I know that's a lot. The end of the argument, the end of the math, is that what we see pictured here are the priests that represent the communities of Jewish people that are faithful to Yahweh and Melchizedek, the Gentile people that are loyal to Yahweh. So what we see is we see in this group, again, a picture of the church. It's a picture of Jews and Gentiles joined together, serving. I know I'm running a little late. I'm good. Then the king instructed, he said, if the Lord sees fit, the Lord said, he'll bring me back to see the ark, the tabernacle again. But if he is through with me, then let him do what he thinks is best. David at this point is kind of doing one of those things. Not necessarily good David, not necessarily bad David. He's doing it because he's laying out a fleece, he's putting out a thing. And at a point of probably why we're going to stop very close to here, it kind of gives us a little bit. It's the thing that when Absalom, his son, was manipulating him, and he said, I made this pledge before I left that if God brought me back, then I'll sacrifice to him. So David is now doing this for real, what Absalom did pretend. That's kind of what we're seeing here. The king also told Zadok the priest, look, here's my plan. You and Abiathar should return quietly to the city with your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan, and I will stop at the shallows of the Jordan River and wait for you there. I will get a report from you. So Zadok, so the two priests took the ark of God back in the city. What are they going to do? They're going to risk their lives to give word to David what the plan is. What this is reminiscent of, and there's several stories that this overlaps. One of them is the story with Jonathan, where he's like, Jonathan, go talk to your dad, find out what's going to happen, and then you relay things. So that's kind of good Davidness of it. As we get to the story, we're not going to read it all this week. We're going to continue on next week. But what's going to happen is we also see these two sons that are going to act kind of as spies, and they're going to spy and hide. And that looks exactly like the story of Rahab and the spies that go into the land. So what we have, which by the way, for us, when we look at it, we go, oh, well, that's like what they did for Joshua is what happens to David. But we think David was a long time ago. And then we go, and Joshua was a long time ago. But we kind of think like Joshua and David are close together. They were not. 500 years from Joshua to David. It's a long time. It's kind of like we think of Cleopatra. She's in Egypt. Pyramids are in Egypt. So she was close to the pyramids. She was not. She is closer to us than she is to the pyramids. Isn't that weird? But that's the reality. So when David is telling the story, when the story about David looks like the story about Joshua, it is encouraging because it means God's been doing this thing for 500 years. So the story of Joshua would be ancient history to David. So seeing God's handiwork here, the same encouragement. For us, the same thing. In our lives, so David is suffering because of his sin, because of his son's sin, and all this sort of thing. Is God working powerfully because of God's grace and work and long-suffering and graciousness? Absolutely. Well, is God's character the same today as it was then? Is his power the same today as it was then? And that's what we do. When we read these stories and see that, we learn the character of God, and we learn the character of not only the main character of the Bible, but the main character of our own story. David walked up the road of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and his feet were bare, as a sign of mourning. And he went up. The people went up where the crowd, all the people were weeping, and they climbed the hill. And when someone told David that his advisor Ahithophel Arnold was backing Absalom, David prayed, "Oh Lord, let Ahithophel give Absalom foolish advice." When David reached the summit of, when we think about Olives, who do we think of? Jesus leaving, right? Jesus leaving and going to the Mount Olives out of Jerusalem. So there's supposed to be, there's in that echo, where God's people worship, or people of God worshipped there. Hishiah, the Archite, was waiting for him. Hishiah had torn his clothes and put dirt on his head as a sign of mourning, but David told him, "If you go with me, you won't be a burden. Return to Jerusalem, tell Absalom, I will now be your advisor, O king, just as I was your father's advisor in the past. Then you will frustrate and counter Ahithophel's advice. Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, will be there. Tell them about your plans, being made by the king's palace, and then they'll send it to me." All right, we're going to pause right here, but I just want to say, here's the other person I changed their name up. When I read this, so Ahithophel. What name do I see when I see Ahithophel? Benedict Arnold. Okay, this will change how you read this, maybe. So, Hishiah, that guy right there, this second guy, his name is friend of the king, or he's the friend of the king, but it's not informal. It's kind of a formal position. One version of it, I thought like a jester, but not like let's make jokes, right? That's not a jester. A jester was the guy that was closest to the king, so when the king had a hard time, the jester was there to kind of pat him on the back and go, "Man, this is rough, I'm there for you." He's like that close personal friend. So then I thought the other version of it would be a butler, but not like I want to shine your shoes butler, more like Alfred to Batman. So when you read the story and you see Hishiah, that's who you should think of. Like Batman's Alfred. So what Batman just told Alfred was, go back and serve the Joker. So that's the story. And on that, we'll pause. I'd love to get further on because there's so much cool stuff. Not so cool stuff, but that's how it goes. When we look at the Bible, we are reminded of the messy world that was in the Bible. Is not a cartoon. It's not a flannel board. It's not a place stripped of color. It is a place of real suffering and real mistakes. David does good things and bad things. Some things more faithful. We see David failing more often when he fails to consult God. A lot of the things that David does wrong, he would have not done wrong had he just looked at the Bible. And not a whole lot. He just needed like the Torah. Just any of the first 5 books. A lot of things he did were in direct violation to just the first 5 books. So he didn't even have to have full knowledge of all the scriptures. Just a little bit of it would help him. But the other one is to have men and women of God speaking into his life. So when we see this in David's story over and over in the narrative, we're reminded why he tells us it's important to surround us with godly people for advice. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, we thank you for your word, which continues to shape and guide us. We recognize that in our own life, that we have surrounded ourselves sometimes with good folks and sometimes with not good. That so often it is for us to go and do the things that the world is doing around us, and instead of standing and doing the mission that you've called us to do the things that are comfortable or things that our heart tells us is right or wrong, but all of that can lead to suffering and destruction. Instead, Lord, help us be agents of your grace and love. Help us resist the world by standing firm with you, so that we can be like the princeling from Gath, who's able to, when asked, go, well, why would I serve anybody else but you? So that we can understand, when the Bible is saying it's better to be one day in the court of yours than 1,000 days other, that's a truth that is understood here, that obedience to you is better than anything the world can ever possibly offer. Lord, help us be faithful to you, help us trust in you, and help us recover the faithfulness that we see sometimes here in these Gentiles, that's been revealed in these Gentiles in this story, that was revealed in the young David. May we be agents of your grace, of your mercy, of your truth, of your justice, no matter the cost. Lord, we thank you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, as you head out, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you. I pray he makes his face to shine upon you, be gracious to you, and grant you peace. Amen. Yeah, I wanted to get to the point where Alfred is giving advice to Benedict Arnold, but
Too easy.
we couldn't make it to that point.